And welcome back. Well, in the previous video in this series, if you happen to be watching these in order, we covered doing the front timing cover, went ahead and got the water pump installed, and we went ahead and installed the windage tray oil pan gasket, the pickup tube for the new oil pump, as well as the oil pan itself. And in this video, at least until we can get the dowel pins in to put the cylinder head in, we're kind of waiting on that piece. But what we can go ahead and do is go ahead and get our lifters in and our MDS block-off plugs in. So let me show you a part number here. What we have are 4 sets of this part number here. And these are made in Germany, as you can see there. And what these lifters have a name in the industry known as, a lot of individuals will call them Hellcat lifters, and they'll be listed as Hellcat lifters when you buy them from various performance websites. Really, what they are is just a factory non-MDS lifter. And they're used in the Hellcats, because the Hellcats generally do not have MDS enabled for performance reasons. And we'll just show you one of these lifters here. You'll notice there's no pin on either side of it. And that's all that is. So it's just the newer revised factory, a non-MDS lifter. And since we're deleting the MDS on this motor completely, we're going to go in with 4 sets of these non-MDS lifters. And just to show you here, let me get these 2 that fell out of the yoke back into the yoke. There we go. And they do come nice and oiled, I have to say. Hopefully you can see that sheen there. And these are straight out of the package, as you saw. So again, 4 of these, which got 4 sets of these, which are going to go into our lifter bores here. What I am going to do, again, you know me, and if you've watched the other parts in this series, I'm going to get a little squirt can out, squirt a little bit of oil into each one of those holes. Again, just to provide some extra lubrication to the cam. Yes, I know that we took the cam out and put a bunch of assembly lube on it, but I'm going to shoot a little bit more lube in there while we have the opportunity to do it. As well as we're going to coat the lifters themselves and a little bit of our Permatex engine assembly lube. Again, just trying to give everything as much of a advantage as we can for that few moments that it's going to start at least a little bit dry until the oil pump can do its job and start throwing oil through the system. But they go in, they're very straightforward. You'll see each set of these are attached to a yoke. And this little hump part of the yoke is going to be facing up, and which is just going to screw into the block there. And these do have a torque pattern. I'm sorry, not a torque pattern, but a torque value. And I'll read that to you here in short. But let me go ahead and, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and unbox the rest of these lifters and get those ready to go. And I'm going to shoot a little bit of lube via our oil can, just like we did on the bottom before we put the windage tray and oil pan in place. We kind of soaked all the lower internals in some lube. Just going to do the same thing here. Literally, like I said, just kind of a couple shots down each bore. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that. And then rather than you just kind of watch me unbox and things of that nature, I'll bring you right back when we're ready to do the install of the lifters. So one moment. And welcome back. So I got you zoomed in on what is the cylinders 2 and 4, because we're looking at the passenger side on this particular motor. Well, let me think about that. I may have just told you incorrect. Motor's going to be slipped around, pushed in. This is actually going to be, yeah, it'll be the passenger side. I had that correct. So this is the passenger side of our motor. So we're looking at cylinders 2, 4, 6, and 8. And the driver's side is 1, 3, 5, and 7. So 2 and 4. Now, so just to show you here, if you were dealing with if you're putting lifters back in the system, back into an engine like this is still going to have MDS enabled, your lifters would look a little bit different, like we talked about earlier, where it's going to have that little pin at the bottom of it. And I don't think I still have an MDS lifter here. If I do, I'll find it and I'll kind of show you the difference between the two. But what will happen on your yoke of lifters is that 2 of these lifters for each yoke, you'll have 2 that'll be non-MDS and 2 that'll be MDS lifters. And if you look at our instruction sheet here, in case you were putting this back together in an MDS motor, you would see that the MDS lifters need to be on cylinders 1, 4, 6, and 7. Now those are the cylinders that it will use oil pressure to depress a pin in the lifter, allowing the lifter to collapse, thus turning the valves off for that particular cylinder. It'll also the ECU will also shut fuel down to that cylinder, basically making that cylinder inactive. And when it's ready to turn those back on, it just turns off the oil pressure via if you have them installed, which you would on the MDS system, but that's your MDS solenoid at the top. Remember, we took those out earlier. We're just going to put block-off plugs in, but it uses that solenoid to control oil pressure. And if it applies oil pressure through that solenoid to those MDS lifters, again, the pins collapse, push in, the lifter collapses, turning the valves off. When it's done, it turns off that solenoid. Those pins pop back out, locking the lifter back into place, or locking the inside of the lifter back into place and allowing the valves to operate again. So this is what we're going to do. Again, like I told you before, I'm just going to take a little bit of assembly lube. I know that these lifters are thoroughly lubed already. I get it. But in my opinion, especially since this is a new engine build, you know, the more lube, the merrier. Sorry, I have to reach around the camera, plus I've got you zoomed in, so it's a bit of a space issue here. And like I told you before, with this stuff, you can see how stringy it is, because my understanding that this, what assembly lube is it's got detergent mixed in with it. At least that's what I've been told before, which is what helps it sticks. That's the reason why, I think that's the reason why, you know, when you do this to it, you can kind of see it get a bit stringy. Again, like I said, it's kind of like dealing with syrup. It's made to stick and kind of hold into place. And you see I'm just getting as much as I can around the shafts of these lifters and around the rollers. And I do have a drip pan that's below the camera here. It's out of sight of your view, but it's just here to try to help contain some of the mess. Now that we've got ourselves thoroughly messy, I've also got some assembly lube on the back of the camera. And we're just going to take them, line them up into our bores. There we go. And the entire assembly should slide into place. There we go. That's better. And then what we can do is that we'll tighten up that set screw that will secure that yoke into the block. And I can give you that torque value, or at least what all data lists for it. All data lists that to be 106 inch-pounds. I'll need to convert that, but we ran into that measurement before. I think 106 inch-pounds is like 8 foot-pounds. Or close to 8 foot-pounds. I'll do the measurement on that before we do the actual torquing. So that's what I'm going to do to the rest of those lifters. I'm just going to get them thoroughly snotted up with some assembly lube, get them all installed, and we'll hand tighten them first and come around and torque them. So just so I'm not wasting a bunch of your time, you watching me put another 3 sets of lifters in, it's the same process. I'm going to get these seated and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got them all, our lifters with all their yokes installed. We just got the bolts hand tight at this point. The conversion came back at 8.8 foot-pounds. But if we look at our torquing specifications per all data, they are listing, I gotta find it here again. Main bearing cap, cylinder, lifter guide holders. There they are. You can see lifter guide holder right there. They're just rounded it up to 9 foot-pounds. So not a lot of torque on these at all. No need to go full, full He-Man on this. He-Man or He-Woman, whichever you may prefer. So we just got it set to 9 foot-pounds. This is a digital one. You'll hear it rapidly beep as we get close, and then you'll hear a solid beep when we hit it. But I don't know if I've ever showed me doing any of the torquing on the camera. And then I'm going to stop. And that's it. Like I said, it's not a lot of torque on those at all. But, just to show you. And I guess I can keep you running while I do the next one. Let me pan you over. And it does give you a rate out as you're getting close. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There you go. That's 9. Like I said, pretty straightforward. Let me hit the other 2 and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So I got the tripod kind of in an odd position. It looks like it's showing up okay for now in the viewfinder. I've got you leaned up against the block. I got the tripod on 2 feet right now, just trying to get you far enough over to see this. So these ports here is where your MDS solenoids would normally be located. If you remember, we removed them. What we're in the process of doing is just installing these block-off plugs that you see here. So any Hemi block that does not have MDS equipped from the factory will generally have these block-off plugs in them rather than the solenoids. Now, you don't necessarily have to remove and replace your non-MDS or your MDS solenoids with your MDS lifters with non-MDS lifters. Like, for instance, it depends on your tune. I guess I can put it that way. You could, in theory, get a tune in which they just disable the MDS system, meaning your MDS lifters are still there, and your solenoids are still there. It'll just never engage the solenoids to apply the oil pressure to collapse the lifters. Even if you're doing this job where you're doing a cam swap and maybe you're doing what we're doing here and you're just removing the MDS lifters and putting all non-MDS lifters in, you could, in theory, leave the solenoids in place rather than buy the block-off plugs, because once again, as long as your tune has the MDS system disabled, then what will happen is those solenoids will be there, but they'll never be used. So they'll basically be doing the same job as the plugs. But since we're due to complete tear down and rebuild on this one, rather than go back in with the solenoids, since they wouldn't be used in this case, and they're a little bit more expensive, it's cheaper just to put the block-off plugs in. So there's the part number of the block-off plug. And yes, once again, Mopar plug. So what I'm going to do is get a little oil out of our oiling can, and I'm just going to oil up the O-rings on this, just so and put a little bit on this bore as well as where the O-rings are going to seal, just so this doesn't go in dry, and potentially, roll a seal or pinch it or damage it in some way. And yes, I'm sorry, I had to reach off camera here to grab the oiling can, but You're not missing anything, I promise you. That's all I'm doing is just putting some oil on here. Make putting this block off plug in a little bit easier. As with a lot of things in this build, going with the lube. Just reaching for a socket, and I'll show you why here in a second. Get a little bit bigger one. This is 13 millimeter. Yeah, that might work. So I just got a 13 millimeter socket here. Now that we've got our block off plug thoroughly lubed, just going to line up that tab with the bolt hole where it needs to be. So that's about the position that it needs to be in. Now what I like to do, it's just me, and I'm just got a rubber mallet here. I'm not going to go crazy with this. I'm just going to put a, and this is, like I said, I don't know if you heard me off camera, this is a 13 millimeter socket. Does a nice job of fitting over the top of that. And I'm just going to tap on this just lightly until this seats. And we'll know that we're seated when this metal tab goes flush with the mounting point in the block. There we go. And I don't know if you heard that tone change. You kind of heard as it drove into position, and you heard that metal tab of that block off plug kind of hit the block where that bolt's going to go through. So I'm going to go through, and again, you saw me, it wasn't very aggressive, just some light taps with a rubber mallet and a socket to kind of help you. And the 13 millimeter socket does a good job, as you can see, of setting over a big meaty portion of this top piece. And plus you've got this metal tab underneath it when they kind of support you. Like I said, you don't want to go too crazy in doing that, because we don't want to snap off the top of this or damage it. That's what I said, just light taps and a little bit of oil around those O-rings, and they should seat fairly well. So I'm going to do that for the remaining 3 that we need to put in, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got our plugs in. As far as the bolts to hold them in, it's just the original bolts that used to hold the solenoids in. And we're going to reuse to hold our block out plugs in, or I should say our block off plugs. Get you zoomed out and bring you back. 1 minute. And welcome back. So there we go. Now we can see all 4. So I'm just going to start by getting these hand tight. I'm going to look and see what the torque spec is on these. They don't have to be too terribly tight. You know, obviously you don't want them coming out. And we don't want the plugs themselves to potentially come out. So that's hand tight already. Not a very big bolt. Let's see if it's listed on this sheet. And rod caps, main caps, lifter guide, lifter guide, lifter guide, lifter guide, mounting plates. Tell you what, I'm gonna have to go check another chart just to make sure that it's not there. It may not be, and there may not be a torque value for this, but let me go take a look at something, and I'll be right back. 1 moment. And welcome back. So I did a little bit of internet searching on this. My manual, even for the installing the solenoids, simply says just to refer to the torque table for the torque value in these bolts. It doesn't list one. It's not there. Could be an oversight. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe they just don't list one for this vehicle for this particular application. So what I can find online, individuals will post anywhere between 8 and 9 foot-pounds. 8 to 9 foot-pounds seems like an awful lot for such a small fastener. What I ended up doing was going with about 7 foot-pounds. That seemed like that was getting tight enough, in my opinion. And again, they're relatively small fasteners. They're just block-off plugs. 7 foot-pounds, and at least in my opinion, seemed like it was more than enough to hold those stationary so they won't go anywhere. And those are 10 millimeter headed bolts, but the bolts, as you saw, are pretty small. They're very, very shallow. So I wouldn't feel comfortable going to 8 to 9 foot-pounds on something that small, but to each their own. Again, it's my opinion. I think they're in tight enough. With this, with the bolt in conjunction with how tight these things sit in the block, I don't think they're going to go anywhere, to be honest with you. And what I'm looking for is in my back pocket. I'm going to hit these all with a Sharpie so that we know they've been torqued, along with hitting the bolts for the yokes, for the lifters. Again, just an indication as we're going back through in case we second guess ourselves and wonder if we did it or not. I should help eliminate that. Okay, so awesome. With that being said, like I said, we're still waiting for the dowel pins to come in to put the cylinder heads on, so we can't do that quite yet. So it looks like we'll more than likely be doing a video, which will be just putting the dowel pins in, getting everything cleaned up, and getting the heads, the push rods, and the rocker arms installed, as well as the valve covers themselves. And inside that video, the next video, we can also do things like install our cam sensor and our crank sensor. It's relatively straightforward to do. I'll wait until the block is, we'll cover, when we do the install, I'll cover this with tape just so dirt doesn't get in there. If you can see it in the floor, in case you're wondering, when it's not being worked on, I'm covering it with the bag that it came from the machine shop, just to keep any particulates out of it. But as far as the thermostat, we'll wait until it's installed in the block is reinstalled in the vehicle before we tackle the thermostat, things of that nature. Because remember, we still have to put the bracketry and the other supercharger bits onto here. So some of these bolts that we took out, keep in mind that even though we installed all the water pump bolts, it's just going to be temporary, because some of those bolts have to come out to account for new standoffs and new links of bolts that'll come with the supercharger kit in order to mount their bracket to the front of the engine. But for now, this is going to be a much shorter video than normal, than what we have been doing on this series, but that's not a bad thing either. Let's see. So with that being said, thank you to everybody who has subscribed thus far. If you have not, please consider doing so. Again, I think we're about 1,976 or 77 subscribers at this point. So we're right on that, right on that goal line of trying to get to that next milestone 2,000 mark. So thank you to everybody who has thus far, and if you haven't, please consider doing so. I talked in the previous video about potentially doing some stuff with the intake. We'll hold on that for now. And what we'll end up doing for that one is once we get the block installed in the engine and we get to that point we'll show you what we're doing there. What's going to happen is we've got some ProCharger pieces that have to go on the intake that count for the supercharger. We've got fuel injector clinic fuel injectors, as well as, and I'll go ahead and tell you verbally, but you'll have to wait to see it. Unfortunately, we did purchase a new intake for this. Let me get you clipped off the tripod. And I'm sorry, I know I'm rambling at the end of the video here. That was the old factory intake that we took off. Now we can clean that up, and I've done it before, and I've reused them before, and there's nothing wrong with this intake, but we did end up purchasing a new aftermarket unit that's been getting really good reviews. We elected to go with that. That way we get a nice, clean intake system. Because one thing that happens with these intakes, because of the PCV system that's on them, is that they tend to build up like a carbon oil type sludge on the inside of the intake ports. Again, it's just the nature of the beast, because you've got crankcase ventilation fumes that come back into the intake to be, reburned by the engine, and that just kind of leaves deposits on the inside of these. So rather than go with something that, although we can clean the outside of it, the inside of it would be very, very hard to do, we elected just to get a new unit. The nice thing is the new unit comes with all new bolts, all new gaskets, the whole 9 yards, a new PCV valve. We will have to take the actuator, SRV actuator, off the back, migrate that over. We'll migrate the throttle body over in that video, and of course the fuel rail. But with the exception of the fuel rail, what we'll have to do is we'll be replacing the factory fuel injectors with bigger fuel injectors that we got from the fuel injector clinic, per recommendation from my tuner, is which one to use. And if I haven't mentioned this before, we're going with the fuel injector clinic's 650 cc injectors. According to my tuner, that will give us all the fuel flow that we need, at least for the time being. So look forward to this video coming up once we get the engine installed. And if you haven't seen glimpses of them in the future, in previous videos, yes, you can see that we've got our valve covers nice and painted and ready to go. So with that being said, once again, I will let you go. I will bring you back for the next one, and I do appreciate it. Thank you much. Bye.